at home might not have heard Viola Liuzzo's name before today, but I wanted you to hear her story and remember her as someone who made the ultimate sacrifice for a more just future for everyone.
In March of 1965, as the civil rights movement reached a turning point in Selma, Alabama, a 39-year-old mother of 5 from Detroit made a decision that would change her life and the nation's history. Her name was Viola Liuzzo. She wasn't famous, she wasn't a politician, and she wasn't a celebrity. She was an ordinary American who chose to act when others looked away. Days later, she would become the only white woman killed during the civil rights movement.
Mrs. Liuzzo went to Alabama to serve the struggles for justice. She was murdered by the enemies of justice, who for decades have used the rope and the gun and the tar and the feathers to terrorize their neighbors. They struck by night, as they generally do, for their purpose cannot stand the light of day.
This is her story. By early 1965, Selma, Alabama had become the epicenter of the fight for voting rights. In Dallas County, where Selma is located, black residents made up nearly half the population, yet only a tiny fraction were registered to vote. Literacy tests, poll taxes, and outright intimidation by sheriffs and the Ku Klux Klan kept African Americans from the ballot box.
Selma, Alabama. 1965.
No, I don't need to leave. We have come to register to vote. We're willing to be beaten for democracy.
Local activists, joined by leaders from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Southern Christian Leadership Conference, began a sustained campaign to register voters.
Today marks the beginning of a determined, organized, mobilized campaign.
Week after week, they faced arrests, beatings, and harassment simply for seeking the right to participate in democracy.
More than half of Dallas County's citizens were black, but less than 1% were registered by 1965. Throughout much of the South, custom and law had long prevented blacks from registering. In Selma, the registrar's office was open only 2 days a month. Registrars would arrive late, leave early, and take long lunch hours. Few blacks who lined up would get in, and getting in was no guarantee of being registered.
In Selma, the only time you could even attempt to register to vote was the first and third Mondays of each month. You had to stand in line, get a copy of the so-called literacy test, and hundreds and thousands of people would fail the so-called literacy test. They were told they could not read or write well enough. African-American lawyers, doctors, teachers. So we started a series of demonstrations, standing in line at the courthouse. One evening, there was a demonstration for the right to vote. Nearby, Selma, a confrontation occurred, and a young man tried to protect his mother. He was shot in the stomach, and a few days later, he died at a local hospital in Selma. We made a decision to attempt to march from Selma to Montgomery.
Tensions reached a breaking point on March 7, 1965, when more than 600 marchers set out from Selma toward Montgomery to demand their rights. On the Edmund Pettus Bridge, they were met by state troopers and deputies wielding clubs and tear gas. The attack, later known as Bloody Sunday, shocked the conscience of the nation.
To be detrimental to your safety to continue this march, and I'm saying that this is an unlawful assembly, you are to disperse. You are ordered to disperse, go home, or go to your church. This march will not continue.
Just 2 days later, a second march was turned back under court order, a day remembered as Turnaround Tuesday. Finally, on March 21st, under federal protection, thousands began the 54-mile march to Montgomery.
And so the march from Selma to Montgomery has begun. Dr. Martin Luther King here, heading a procession of between 7,000 and 10,000 people on the first stage of their march towards Montgomery and the state capitol.
Oh, this the light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this the light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this the light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
This was more than a protest. It was a direct challenge to Jim Crow, to Governor George Wallace, and to the system of racial oppression that had ruled the South for generations. Among the millions who watched these events unfold on television was Viola Liuzzo, at home in Detroit. She wept as she saw men and women beaten for demanding basic rights. In that moment, she knew she had to act. But who was this woman who felt so deeply moved by the struggle in Selma? To understand why Viola took such a bold step, we need to look back at her own life, a journey shaped by hardship, empathy, and an unwavering sense of justice. If you're enjoying this story, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps bring more untold histories like this one to light. Viola Greg Liuzzo had grown up in the segregated South and knew firsthand the cruelty of racism. By the 1960s, she was raising 5 children with her husband Anthony, a Teamsters organizer in Detroit. She was also one of the few white members of the city's NAACP. Friends described her as compassionate, restless, and unwilling to accept injustice.
She was not like everybody others, not like the other moms, not like she stood out. She wasn't afraid to speak her mind. And even her own sister said she was always boisterous. She was always, outspoken. And so this was something inherent in her from a small child.
But probably the thing I remember most was that she would ask me questions and ask me to imagine what it would have been like if I had grown up and never seen a white face on a television show, or never seen a white model on a magazine cover, never saw a white Santa in a department store. And she told me to think about that and to try to think how I would feel.
After Bloody Sunday, Viola's sense of duty only deepened. And when the news broke that white minister James Reeb had been murdered in Selma, she told her husband, "This is everybody's fight."
This minister's going to die, isn't he? Yes, sir. What time do you think he'll die?
They tell me that he could stay alive for another 24 or 36 hours.
To ask the question, who killed James Reeb? That is another haunting one escape question. We of course asked this afternoon. It is the question, what killed James Reeb?
Within days, she packed her car and drove 800 miles south, leaving behind her children, but carrying with her a powerful conviction that justice could not wait. When she arrived in Selma, Viola wasted no time. She threw herself into the work of the march, side by side with seasoned activists who quickly saw her dedication and energy.
Judge Johnson has just ruled that we have a legal and constitutional right to march from Selma to Montgomery.
On March 21st, she proudly joined thousands crossing the Pettus Bridge, shoulder to shoulder, in defiance of hate.
We're marching on to freedom land. We're marching on to freedom land. 'Cause our strength from day to day as we walk the narrow way.
4 days later, the marchers triumphantly reached Montgomery, where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. declared,
"How long? Not long. Because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. How long? Not long."
Viola was there. And after the rally, she volunteered once again to drive exhausted marchers back along the dark highway to Selma. That night, March 25th, Viola drove along Highway 80 with a young black activist named Leroy Moten. As they traveled, 4 Klansmen, 3 members of the KKK, and 1 FBI informant spotted them. They gave chase. Viola pressed the accelerator, racing at nearly 100 miles an hour. She knew the danger, but she kept driving, and even began singing the anthem of the movement, "We Shall Overcome." After 20 miles, the Klan car pulled aside. Viola looked over and saw a pistol pointed at her. A shot rang out. A bullet struck her head. The car veered off the road, slamming into an embankment. Viola was killed instantly. News of her murder spread quickly, and the nation erupted in shock and outrage. Just hours later, President Lyndon Johnson appeared on live TV calling her killers the enemies of justice. With FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover at his side, Johnson announced the arrest of the 4 Klansmen.
Arrests were made a few minutes ago of 4 Ku Klux Klan members in Birmingham, Alabama, charging them with conspiracy to violate the civil rights of the murdered woman. Mr. J. Edgar Hoover, our honored public servant who is standing here by me, has advised that the identities of the men charged with this heinous crime are as follows. Eugene Thomas, age 43, of Bessemer. William Orville Eaton, age 41, also of Bessemer. Gary Thomas Rowe, age 31, of Birmingham. And Collie Leroy Wilkins, Jr., age 21, of Fairfield, Alabama.
It was one of the first times an American president had condemned the Ku Klux Klan so directly. But in Alabama, justice faltered. 2 state trials failed, 1 jury hung, another acquitted. It took a federal trial on charges of violating Viola's civil rights to finally convict the Klansmen. Each was sentenced to 10 years in prison. It was a rare moment of accountability in the Deep South and a milestone in the fight against racial terror. Yet even as her killer sat behind bars, another battle over Viola's memory had begun, one waged not in the streets of Alabama, but in the offices of the FBI. To deflect attention from its own informant in the murder car, J. Edgar Hoover ordered a smear campaign against Viola. Agents whispered to reporters that she was unstable, a drug user, even that she was having an affair with the young black man she drove that night.
Michael J. Shaheen, who, this was in 1979, we were in Washington at the Justice Department. He was in charge of the Department of Public Integrity. He told us that there was one person in this country who could change the time and place of any Klans meeting in the United States with one phone call, and it was J. Edgar Hoover. And out of 10,000 registered Klansmen, 3,000 of them were paid FBI informants, and they were in high echelon positions in the Klan.
I believe that a lot of the informants created the very violence that they went in and then reported on and pretended to solve. And I believe that that was a very comfortable arrangement. At that time, we're talking about a J. Edgar Hoover FBI. The FBI never took fingerprints off of the gun that murdered my mother. They had the weapon, they never took it, and protected Gary Thomas Rowe from any prosecution by the state of Alabama or anyone else.
These lies spread quickly. Instead of honoring her sacrifice, some Americans questioned her morals. Her family suffered immensely. Hate mail poured in, a cross was burned on their lawn, her children were threatened, even attacked at school.
It was just a terrible time. I mean, it was like I was in a fog and a dream for weeks thereafter. My little sister coming home from school had people in the neighborhood throwing rocks at her and sticks. These are adults calling her an N-lover and your mother was a whore. And it was just horrible. They dumped garbage on our lawn. They burned crosses, as you said, and shot bullets through our windows. They tried to storm the house and break into the house. We lived with armed guards 24 hours a day for 2 years. You know, it took its toll on the family.
For years, Viola's name was clouded by slander. It wasn't until the late 1970s, when FBI files were declassified, that the truth came out. The government had lied. Viola Liuzzo's only crime was standing for justice. Though her life was cut short, Viola Liuzzo's sacrifice left a lasting legacy. Just 5 months after her death, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, one of the most important laws of the 20th century. Her name is now etched on the Civil Rights Memorial in Montgomery alongside other martyrs of the struggle. A park in Detroit bears her name, as do memorials along the Alabama Highway where she died. In 2004, the documentary Home of the Brave told her story through the voices of her children. And in 2015, Wayne State University awarded her an honorary doctorate, recognizing her as a symbol of moral courage. Viola Liuzzo was not a politician or a soldier or a celebrity. She was a mother, a wife, and an ordinary American who chose to stand up for what was right. In doing so, she paid the ultimate price. Her story reminds us that the struggle for justice has always required ordinary people to take extraordinary risks. Viola believed that this was everybody's fight, and because of her, millions today can cast their votes freely. Her voice is gone, but her message still echoes. When you see injustice, don't look away. Do something. That is how change is made.